The views reflected by any of the guests may not reflect the views of the podcast host. Some topics may be difficult for some listeners. Proceed at your own risk. This podcast does not replace psychotherapy or advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Welcome to Apology, Stories of Hope, Healing, and Resilience. I'm your host, Christine McKelvey. Today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Tara Armstead. She has been an educator for over 18 years, and she opens up about her personal battles and how they inspired her to write a book that challenges societal norms and educational practices. In her book, she has different reflections and stories as an educator, and so we really dive into the importance of tailoring education to the child, which does not necessarily mean from an academic perspective, but from an emotional support perspective as well. You're not going to want to miss this. Welcome to Apology, Stories of Hope, Healing, and Resilience. I'm your host, Christina McKelvey. Today, I want to welcome Dr. Tara Armstead. She is the Dean of Students at a school in Phoenix and has been an educator for over 18 years. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off by, why don't you tell my audience a little bit about you, your background, and your book that you have?
So, as far as who I am and my background, I was a child that grew up, I had both parents. Did not have any major struggles that some would think, but I did fight against rejection and depression and suicidal thoughts for a significant amount of time in my life. And so getting into the field of education for me was to go and try to correct what I experienced when I was in school, because the teacher I am is the teacher I wish I had. And my book is an extension of that. So I've worked with a lot of different students in a lot of different situations. And after 2020, a lot of students were saying, you need to write a book. You need to tell our story. And so that's what the book is. It's from my perspective as a student and a teacher, but also the feedback that I got from my students.
Dr. Armstead, I love that you just said the teacher I am is the teacher I wish I had.
Yes, definitely. And that's because, so part of the book, sometimes when people read the title, they get a little in their feelings, because I say that education can make people think that different is bad. And a lot of us, if we really took the time to think about it, we can remember at least one teacher that made us feel like we were deficient because we were different. And so I remember feeling that way. Most of the time it was like a math class, because that's one of my weak areas.
Same.
And so so you get me.
Oh my goodness, yes.
The main thing I wanted to do was ensure that students do not feel deficient just because they're different. I want them to embrace that, because you're only going to be successful and leave a legacy when you hold true to yourself.
I mean, when you say difference, let's break that apart. What would you say societal or the concept of different that we may say, especially in education, that definition may be, and your definition of difference? Is there a difference?
Society is very embracing of extroverted individuals who they're hardworking, they strive to reach their goal all the time, and that kind of thing. In education, it's kind of the same. So I'm an introvert dominant person. A lot of people mistake me for being extrovert, but when you go into a classroom, the expectation is that you come in, you're obedient, as some like to say, you do the work, you meet the expectations, but you're this bubbly type of individual when it comes to interacting with others. So if you have a child that comes from a household that has shaped them to be an introvert, they're seen as different. If you have a child who does not learn by direct instruction all the time, they're seen as different. And then if you get into those who may have autism or some ADHD or something like that, they're seen as different and deficient, rather than this is an opportunity for me as an educator to learn how to better teach all young people, instead of saying, oh, you just need to mold into what everybody else is doing.
So embracing differences,
yes,
as opposed to changing the difference and
Right.
having individuals kind of mold to society.
Right. Because, I mean, we just look at the major changes that have happened in society.
Mm-hmm.
They all were started by somebody who was seen as different.
Yeah. And, neurodiversity is something that has been, there's a lot more education around neurodiversity
Right.
and, a lot of changes. Let's speak a little bit more about neurodiversity and what that might look like, especially, and how your belief in the appropriate way to educate someone that might be neurodiverse.
I just feel like you have to, as an educator, and this is what I do as an educator, I feel like I need to learn how my students learn. So I should be teaching in a way that they learn rather than trying to get them to learn in the way that I teach. That was a struggle I had when I was in school because I'm not a one set type of learner. So there's certain subjects where I'm an auditory learner and others I'm more visual. But growing up, most teachers, if you have a student who may be neurodivergent, it's still this mindset of, well, you're just going to have to figure out how to do it the way that I do it. And so that's where to me, that's where the deficiencies come from because you're not learning the child, you're forcing the child to be who you want them to be.
My bachelor's is in interdisciplinary studies with an emphasis
Mhm.
on childhood education. And I remember that we had to form our lesson plans to make sure that we were individualizing education.
Yes.
However, in reality, that was not, we weren't able to do that. And I know I struggled a lot just growing up myself, with teachers saying this is how you need to learn.
Yes.
Even though as an adult, I realized my learning style, and I wish I had that learning style. Like I wish they taught me that way when I was younger,
Right.
but I had to become an adult to learn it. I had to finish my education to figure out how I needed to learn back then.
Right. It's backwards. And
Mm-hmm.
and some people think it's more difficult than what it is. When I say teaching according to how your students learn, it's just basically giving them a chance to be the leader in the classroom. Because to me, I
Yeah.
feel like the best education is when the adult is the facilitator,
Mm-hmm.
because then you really get to sit back and see what the interests of all these students are. So then when you're teaching something, you can bring that into it. Because even though teachers teach the same content every single year, the way that they teach it should not be the same way every year because they're not the same students every year.
You have kinetic learners, auditory learners, visual learners, those that use all three, and maybe even
Right.
outside of that. Is that is that still a predominant theory of the different learning styles, or has that changed a little bit, or do you have a different viewpoint?
It's the same, but I have this difficulty in putting students in one type of learning style because that's what I see a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
So like going back to math, it wasn't until I got older that I realized that I am a visual and auditory learner when it comes to math. If I have either or, I struggle on a serious level. But usually what we do is we have students take some type of test or survey and they'll get kinesthetic learner. And now everybody thinks in every subject that's the way they learn, but it's not. It's different in every subject because if you put me in an ELA class, I may look like I'm not paying attention because all I need to do is hear it and then I can tackle the assignment.
I really think that's a really great point that you're making, that, we put students into a box saying, okay, you learn, by using your hands. You're an auditory learner, you're a visual learner for all subjects, where different subjects are different. Math is very
Right.
different from English versus science. And thinking back to when I was younger, I was very uh, tactile kinetic learning through, like, with science.
Yes.
Love geology because you held rocks and you're able to see it and feel it, and then the concepts became natural. And math, I sucked at math until I took Math 100, and it was taught some, I don't know if it was the Russian style way or whatnot, but basically I had to write a paper on an equation,
Hmm.
a 3-page paper on just one equation.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I know, it sounds ridiculous. However, I understood the equation and I found it fascinating. So, I think that's a really great point that you make, that everyone has a different learning style, and everyone has a different learning style with different subjects.
Yes.
So how do you rectify that with our state of education today? You know, especially the public school system. Big question, I know. We're gonna solve it.
So I honestly, people think I'm crazy when I say this. I say the main reason why education is the way that it is right now is because, number one, those who are higher up in education that have the power to do this, that, and the other, based on their experience in education, that's where their belief in its priority comes from. So if they grew up and they had a traumatic experience in education, they don't care about switching anything right now. They don't care to hear, hey, this is why students aren't engaged. You're teaching it this way. You need to consider this. I think the other side of that too, I've noticed the longer that I've stayed in the field that we are becoming less and less human in the system of education. So we are focused on testing, we're focused on grades, we're not focused on what are the actual things that are causing students to be more aggressive, more disengaged, the parents to check out. And when somebody brings those things up, it's usually like, oh, well, that's just feelings and those kind of things. We don't need to consider that, or, that's not the real issue. Because no matter how much money or curriculum we've thrown at education, we can all clearly see that it's not solving the major issues we see.
I'm sitting with that because there's so many different ideas on how to solve the crisis of education. And I think a lot of people agree that, individualized education is a must.
Yes.
And it's not always doable, especially in low SES areas. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, I taught at a Title I school. I want to say it was 2016. And we had a student that all of a sudden he was more aggressive. He was constantly getting in fights, yelling and cursing at his teachers. And they were always suspending him, but it didn't resolve it. And so I was teaching PE at the time, and I had him in my class, and he got into an altercation with another student. Keep in mind, this is a third grader. And so I told him, I said, go in my office, scream, yell, whatever you need to do. Just don't break anything. And then when you're ready to come out of there, come sit out here on the bleachers and let's talk. So when he came out and sat on the bleachers, and I just simply asked him, like, what's going on? Like, this is not typical for you. And he told me that a couple of days ago, his father had told him that him and his siblings were going to go visit their mom in the hospital. And so when they got to the hospital, she was already deceased. And the father knew that, but did not tell them that. And so he was saying that he was talking with another classmate, and he said something like, I'm going to beat you up so bad, I'm going to send you to the hospital, or something like that. And hearing that word hospital triggered him. And the reason why, I didn't realize it at the time, but the reason why he was so quick to yell and argue with his teachers, all of his teachers were female. And he just lost his mom. And so I'm sitting there talking with him, and his class is over, having this discussion. I just look at him and I'm like, do you need a hug? And he grabbed me so tight and didn't let go for the longest time. And from that point on, I could talk to him and tell him, like, look, I get it. I'll never understand that type of pain, but you have to understand that some people don't know what's going on in your life unless you tell them. So you can't get angry if they don't know, but you got to have that conversation. He was successful for the rest of that school year. And years after that, I was in a Target. It was during COVID lockdowns, so I had a mask on. I had a different hairstyle. And I'm standing there talking with my mom, and all of a sudden somebody walks up to me and says, "Hey, are you Miss Armstead from blah 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 blah?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Hey, it's me." And it was just my voice that
Oh
he
my
remembered.
goodness.
So
Wow.
that sticks with me because that's what I mean by individualizing education is,
Mm-hmm.
yes, he's going to get his consequences. Yes, he's going to need some additional help with academics, but take the time and let that child know, I see you and I hear you and I value you, because now no matter where I am, if that child sees me, they're not gonna remember what I was teaching. They're gonna remember this person loved me. And they will work harder for those that know that they know that you love them.
You saw him, you heard him, he felt that, and that
Yes.
motivated him, not necessarily like not just behaviorally to do better, but academically.
Right.
And he succeeded and thrived. Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of stuff that I have stories for days.
Let's go for it. And so these are stories that are in your book.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my book is real authentic. It's some people have said it's kind of like a conviction,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not saying I'm a perfect educator and I have it all together, but I think the way that we're trained to be educators, we forget sometimes that it's not all meant to be robotic. So
Mm.
when I speak about certain things, like I talk about dress codes and different things like that, it's not a traditional type of opinion about it. And it gets people to think like, that is true. Or I never
Mm.
thought about that, instead of just washing over everything.
Mm. Instead of washing over everything, what are some examples that you would want to share? You mentioned the story of, this child. Are there additional themes in your book that you want to highlight?
Yes, the main thing, and you will see, or who they will see, whomever reads the book, is that my main goal for education is reconciliation. There's
Yeah.
very much a we versus them when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to education. We meaning those who are employees of the school, and then them, the student, the parents, and whomever else. And so even when it comes to administration, I will never forget my first year teaching. Um, the principal called me into the office because at the time you had to go to the administrator's office to find out if you had a contract or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told that I was not going to be renewed because she felt that I didn't fit in education.
When was
And
this?
it
Like the beginning of your career? Like, I guess
my
that's what I'm asking.
very first year teaching.
Oh
And
my
so
goodness. Wow.
she said I didn't fit in education and I needed to go back to college and look at finding a different career. And I remember sitting there like, what? Like, I just spent all this time getting this degree,
Yeah.
and you told me I don't fit in education. And I wanted to quit. Like, I tell everybody, I wanted to quit 18 years ago
Mm.
because I did not want to try to prove myself. But I believe the reason why she felt that way was because I was different. And so
Mhm.
that goes back to that title where different is seen as deficient rather than different is should be seen as something that can shift something for the positive. I am not a traditional teacher. I speak about things. I've had lots of people tell me, you say what people are thinking but are afraid to say. And so my first year of teaching, I didn't want to go in there and be a robot. I was trying to connect with the students and play
What
the
grade?
music that they enjoyed. And I guess that's what it means to not fit in education.
And what grade was that?
That was kindergarten through fifth grade.
Okay. Okay. Ah. So you were told because you were different, you didn't fit that mold. Your boss basically said, "Go back to college,
Right.
go back to school for another 4 years, get a different career." And you we're like, no, you bounced back. You had that resilience, and now you're
Right.
here as a dean of students. You mentioned reconciliation earlier. I'm curious the link between having that reconciliation, students having reconciliation and their resilience in education or in general, like that link, if you see there's a link in there.
So basically, what I mean by reconciliation is once people
Yes.
know that you want them on your team and you're genuine about it, they are going to work harder than you in some instances, and they are always going to be willing to step up. But when they feel like, oh, I'm just additional help, I'm not really needed, then that's where we see what we do now. I believe personally, I believe that's why parental engagement is low. I believe that's why student engagement is low. I believe that's why a lot of teachers are leaving the field, because there's no sense of we're in this together. It is very much, even me being an administrator, I get flat because I let staff know I'm not here and you're here up top, and I'm up top and you're the bottom. We're in the same boat. We need to do this together because the ultimate goal is student success, not mine.
Yeah. You're a guide. And, I think Western society tends to have that leader, like, I'm up here, look at me, ivory tower, follow me, I'm the expert. Whereas a lot of other cultures have more of like, I'm going to walk alongside you. I did
Yes.
this. I don't know if it's an ABA model, but someone that I know that's an BCBA, and I use this as well. Some of my parents that I counsel, it's I do, we do, you do.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of cultures like, we're going to do this together. Observe me, we'll do it together, and now I will have you do it on your own, but I will be there to guide you and support you, instead of I'm the expert, look at me, follow me, don't question me.
Yes, that is huge.
And I'm assuming that you questioned.
Yeah. How did you guess?
I don't know, just a guess. Because I did the same thing. And yeah, anyways, go ahead.
I mean, and it's not me questioning as though like I'm questioning somebody's authority. It's
Right.
me saying, why do we keep
Inquisitiveness.
doing this?
Ah, yes.
I mean, I served on a school board, I think it was 3 years ago. And that was the one reason why I eventually had to step down after 5 months, because there was almost like so much hatred for me asking questions to get to the root of the cause. And that's why I question a lot, because I want to know, why is it that we do this? Is it because it's what's comfortable? Is it because we fear what may happen if we step out of that? Because if it's not working, why keep doing it? And that's a major thing in education right now. I don't question why we train educators the way we do to say, hey, this whole thing sucks and we need to start all over. But like, why are we training teachers to believe that when they get in the classroom, there's perfect students and all you have to do is be in control and everything is going to be good, rather than having them do one semester of student teaching in an alternative school and then the other semester in a gen ed school, so they can see that, some of these students are going to be in your classroom. What are you going to do to create that connection of being human first?
That's the key. Being human first.
Yes.
Oh.
But it's scary for some people, and I don't understand why.
To see the human?
Yes.
I'm not sure. Okay.
Or to be human. I actually got some negative feedback because I had a conversation with a student one time who asked me why, like, was I married? And I told him, no, I'm divorced. I'm a single parent, blah, 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 blah. And the adults felt like, oh, you don't need to be that personal with students. But my attitude is, why not? Then they know, if they're in a single parent household, here's somebody else that, okay, cool. I know what she's going through because my mom is going through it. It's not just me.
They see themselves in you, or they see their situation in you. You have that attunement.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that attunement between, educator and student, again, helps with that reconciliation you're talking about, helps with that student moving forward and being successful.
It does. It's huge. I mean,
Yeah.
just think about your favorite teacher
Mm.
and why they were your favorite teacher. And it's because they were human. They made you feel seen and heard, not because they were this dictator in the classroom.
That's really true. Mr. Walsh, that was his name. And I was teased when I was younger a lot.
So was I.
And see, when I was younger, I was very awkward. And it was in third grade, my third grade teacher. And he sent me to his wife's classroom for the day to help the second graders, be a to help them out. And it was like, I was kind of like already questioning, like, why is he doing that? I came back and all the students were super nice to me. Christina, that's a really great drawing. Oh my goodness, you're a great writer. Christina, I love your shirt. And a lot of it was empty platitudes, but what I found out was he spoke to them about why are you so mean to her? And it was a
Wow.
specific incident that happened because it was ongoing teasing. A lot of kids were teased.
Hmm.
I wasn't the only one, but it was a specific incident that triggered him to talk to them. And that stuck with me because whether you agree with the approach or not, he saw me and he really wanted to nip that in the bud. Now,
Right.
that only lasted for a few months because it was third grade, right? But that has stuck with me forever. And the other teachers that stick with me are the teachers that didn't see me as human
Yes.
or didn't hear me, didn't see me.
And I talk about some of those in my book too. I do
Mm,
music. So I have music on Spotify and there's one song
I
called
saw that.
Educational Trauma. And that is a song where I talk about a lot of things that happened to me. So the
Mm.
good teachers are the ones that we remember, but also those ones that like they just created, I just call it educational trauma. They created some part of you
Hmm.
that you will never forget about education. And I think that's why it's so important for me when I'm talking with parents to share those things because then they can understand that just because I'm in this position doesn't mean I had a perfect experience. So, because some parents don't come to the school because of the trauma they had when they were little. So, I want to break that down by saying, hey, this is what I've experienced, this is what I've gone through. So, you see the human sitting here, but then you also see this passionate dean of students that's trying to help your child from a heart perspective.
Let's dig into that a little bit more, your experience growing up. Because that, it sounds like that played a huge role in you being an educator. You've seen the systemic issues in the field of education, wanting to make a change. Are there any pivotal moments you would feel okay sharing with my listeners that helped propel you to this work?
So there's two very specific instances, and one of them, well, actually three. It started in third grade. I don't know why third grade is where a lot of students have trauma.
I know, right?
But I was at a Catholic school at the time, and we were coming back from lunch, and the nun wanted everybody to go to the bathroom. And at the time, I didn't have to go to the bathroom. So I didn't go. And then we went back to the classroom and we were in there for about an hour or so, and I had to go to the restroom. And I asked her, and she said no. So I asked her a couple more times, and she was like, "No, you should have went when I told you to go." And I ended up using the bathroom on myself,
Hmm.
and the whole class laughing at me, and then her calling my parents and lying and telling my parents I had an accident because I had refused to go to the bathroom. And it was really just, I didn't have to go when you told me to go.
Yeah.
But now that I have to go, now you're holding me hostage. And the reason why that's why I'm not such a controlling teacher.
Hmm.
And I don't get triggered when students don't necessarily want to do something that I'm asking them to do. Because sometimes it's not like a rebellion thing. Sometimes it's just they don't want to do it at the time. They don't
Hmm.
trust me yet. Um, the second instance was math. Um, I don't know why when I was a child, me and math just we did not get along. And so it was seventh grade math. I was getting bullied in the band class before that class. And so I remember he was teaching some kind of, I don't even remember, on the board, and it was not clicking. And so I raised my hand to ask if he could explain it one more time. And his exact words were, well, maybe if you weren't talking, you would understand it. And I just started crying. And I remember it was like a pool of tears on my desk. Again, students laughing at me. He called the principal down, said I was being disruptive to the class, called my parents and told them that I wasn't paying attention and all that kind of stuff. And from seventh grade on, I struggled in math completely. Last instance was high school. I was heavily, severely bullied in high school. And in fact, in seventh grade, I actually had attempted suicide because of bullying. So when I got to high school, I was just completely at my wit's end. And I woke up one morning and I said, I'm not going to talk unless somebody
Mm-hmm.
talks to me.
Mm-hmm.
I started school at 7:10 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
and school ended at 2:10 p.m. I did not talk that entire day. So no student spoke to me. The teacher didn't call on me. No one said, hey, when I was in the hallway. No one acknowledged me. So I literally sat silent for a whole entire 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that pushed me further into education to say, even if this child does not like me for personal reasons, I'm going to acknowledge them and say, hey, or good morning, or how are you? Because I don't know if that child is feeling the same way that I am, or internalizing this mindset of nobody's talking to me, so I don't need to be here. Um, so those are I've gone through a lot, but those are three significant situations that really, even some days when I'm like, you know what, maybe I need to get out of education because this is too tough right now. Those are
Mm-hmm.
the things that keep me in it and push me to have that motivation. Like, it may not be seen right now, but later on in life, you're going to see the fruit of your labor.
Yeah.
Because I didn't go through all that stuff just to suffer. I believe I went through that so I could be a different teacher, even though different is seen as deficient in education.
Hmm. Different is seen as deficient when it really shouldn't be.
Right.
Yeah, and those experiences that you mentioned, it's interesting. It's third and seventh grade, both are very critical ages, where kids are changing. Third
Yes.
grade, 8, 9, and then you're, years old, seventh grade. I think it's like 12, 13, high school, so those are all
Mhm.
very significant ages. And one thing that's interesting is in your high school experience, like, a teacher, you mentioned like teachers saying hi, even if you don't like the teacher still, or if the student doesn't like you, still saying hi, seeing
Right.
the human, you might be the only safe adult that they have.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, this year, it's funny because usually students say they're scared of me when they see me because they say I have a very
Oh,
stern and serious face. And then when they see I'm a big kid, they're like, oh no,
yeah.
she just looks mean. But I had a student this year,
Mm-hmm.
he reminded me of myself so much in high school.
Mm-hmm.
It was a time where I think it was a situation where him and his girlfriend had broke up.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he was just gone off campus. And I had built a connection with his mom, and I had texted her like, your son is not on campus. Did you know about it? She's like, no, nobody contacted me. So she took off work, went looking, got him on the phone, and this child was about to walk into oncoming traffic on I-17.
Oh my goodness.
And she
Mm.
pulled up to the school, handed me the phone, and said, I need you to talk to my son. I just need you to talk to him. And I'm screaming, I'm literally screaming at the top of my lungs. And I'm hearing this child say, nobody cares about me, so why should I care? I'm tired of this. I don't want to be here. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
screaming at the top of my lungs. And I'm like, don't do me. You are about to do me. I cannot let you do that. If no
Don't do
one
me.
else has said it,
Mm-hmm.
I love you. Listen to me. And so eventually I was able to go and with his mom and get him and just talk to him.
Yeah.
And ever since then, there's sometimes I don't even need to say a word to him. He knows I'm just making sure that you're good. And I
Yeah.
think those situations, and that one specifically, had I not gone through what I went through, where I felt rejected and I felt, you know what, let me just pop these aspirin pills I know I'm super allergic to and then kill myself. If I hadn't gone through that, I would
Yeah.
not have been able to connect with this child. And so that passion sometimes, or that leniency with some students, people see it as me being weak or a pushover, but they don't understand it's because I can feel what that child is going through because I've been there, and I don't want them to do me. I don't want them to make my mistake.
Mm. Don't do me. And that was that was that self-disclosure. You were telling this child,
Yes.
don't do me. You were being human. And I'm sure a lot of teachers would never share that much info at the time.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's scary though. I feel like I want students to understand that where you are now is not where you're always going to be,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and to embrace the fact that you see things different, because for many years of my life, even being an educator, I tried to do what everybody else was doing
Mm-hmm.
because that's how I thought I was going to find success. But actually all it did was suppress who I was really meant to be, to save these students from whatever situations they might get into.
And it's interesting because in the field of mental health, it's similar. There's the whole blank slate, don't disclose as
Hmm.
the therapist. Again, because of that perception of authority.
Right.
And sometimes that's appropriate, but other times, when I have disclosed to clients and said, me too, I understand. I see you, I hear you because I was there. Our
Right.
alignment strengthens. And I'm still, still walking alongside them,
Hmm.
but it shifts and they have that hope.
Yes.
And, so I could totally see how in education it would be similar and giving students
And
that hope. Yeah.
just like you mentioned, hope, it to me, that's the main thing missing in education. If you think
Let's talk
about
about
it,
that. Yeah.
test scores, college expectations, all the things that are put on children, that it suppresses that hope that, you can do something.
Mm,
Because even though we are 4 years out of the lockdowns, we have to think about the fact that these young people went from being social and with their friends to silence only through a laptop. And then even when they came back to school, it was, oh, you can't sit next to each other. You can't do this. You can't do that. And then after that, it was, hey, it's normal. Like, that doesn't help a child mentally to even understand, like, am I going to actually be able to function once I'm not in school? Or am I okay because I don't know what I want to do after high school? Like, there's a lot of suppression of the concept of giving them hope, even though there's all this negative stuff that they're still processing through.
And would you say that this generation has less hope for the future than our generation when we were
Actually,
growing up?
I would say, so my son is currently 16.
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear him talk about, when he says my generation, sometimes it actually breaks my heart, because it does sound
Mm,
like they don't have hope, because they're looking at the previous generation, which is their parents, and how we're processing and struggling through this. So they're like, okay, well, if they're struggling, what the heck am I going to do? But my son also asked the question. He said, why is it that this generation has to go through all of this negative stuff in the world? And I said, it's because your generation is stronger than mine. That's why you were born at this specific time, because you guys are going to get older, and this is going to be the foundation to make you stronger, more self-aware adults. My generation didn't have to go through all that. I think the craziest thing for me growing up was 9/11, and Y2K, when
same.
everybody
Yeah.
thought the world was going to shut down.
Yeah. In 2008, the economic
Oh yeah,
crisis,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think. But that didn't really affect me as much. But yeah, 9/11, I was a junior. I was a junior in high school.
Hmm. I had just graduated, and of course, I was not paying attention to the news, but my brother told me turn on the TV, and it just completely, like I explained to my son, I'm like, you imagine going from planes flying and hearing all this noise to now just silence.
Mm-hmm.
And now you go to the airport, you got to take your shoes off, and your family can't come with you to the gate. Like that was significant, but it wasn't a social silence like they had to go through. I can never imagine that.
Oh, yes. And, speaking of, today's youth and, the social aspects. Yeah, yes, the pandemic, that social silence, and I love that term. That is such an accurate term. But social media plays a huge role in our youth today. The young Gen Z and the Alpha. I don't know.
I don't remember either.
But yeah, and so I'm sure that social media is obviously has its influence in their perception of hope in their future.
Yes. And the thing about that too, again, me being different and me
Mm-hmm.
questioning, a lot of teachers want to fight social media in the educational setting, but I find that it's easier if we use it to our benefit.
Mm.
So there's been times where students have asked questions about certain concepts or whatever,
Yeah.
and I show them how they can go on TikTok especially, and get those answers quickly, and then have them teach a classmate. You learned it, now you teach. And if you
Uh-huh.
can't teach it, that means you haven't learned it. Or just pulling up videos that somebody may have on there and having them watch it at the beginning of class,
Yeah.
and then having them have a conversation about it and just to check in. And what I find is that if you don't fight those things, then again, you're seen as human, and your students are going to respect you. Um, I play Fortnite because of my students. I stream my video games online because of my students, because they were in class talking about it all the time. So I'm going to waste more energy trying to fight and get them to be quiet than to just say, oh, yeah, I'm playing it too. And then we can banter back and forth, but then also say, okay, let's get back to what we need to handle. But social media is also negative if they don't have any boundaries with it. And so
Mm.
I think that's why we have to stop blaming parents and start, as a system, recognizing that if we're irritated with it in our classrooms, let's have that honest discussion about how it can be harmful, instead of just remaining quiet and expecting parents to handle it, or thinking that a suspension or a detention is going to stop them from using it.
And it doesn't.
No, absolutely not.
They find a way. And so, what are some of the things you're doing besides, being an administrator? What are some additional things that you're doing within the Arizona area, or just in general, to make change? I have some things listed, like the homeless initiative.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
So I started that homelessness initiative when I went out, I think it was last summer, and I was working with another friend of mine who has a nonprofit and passing out food, and I saw that there were a lot of teenagers. Um,
mm,
and it broke me, because I cannot imagine. And I'm so thankful that my parents did not kick me out when I was 18. But from that, every time the weather changes or something goes on, those are the first individuals I think about. Like something
mhm.
as simple in Arizona that we don't think about is sunglasses. Imagine experiencing homelessness and you're
Yeah.
walking out in the streets in 115-degree weather and you don't even have sunglasses to protect your eyes or an umbrella. So I started that initiative, and I want to keep it rolling just to continuously be able to help those individuals out, because not everyone who is experiencing homelessness is an addict or
Uh-huh.
put themselves in that situation.
Right.
Um, if it wasn't for my parents, I probably would be on the streets.
Mm.
But I also go and volunteer in a detention center here in Phoenix. I work with another nonprofit, and we go in and try to help those young people who are currently incarcerated to think about a business or a career goal that they can work to create a vision for and develop it so that when they do get released, they do not end up back in there.
Mm-hmm.
And even working with those young people, it's more of, again, that being human and
Yeah.
that showing them that they're seen rather than this, hey, I'm not in here, so I'm better because you're locked up kind of attitude. But usually I'm out here in any opportunity that I have, just talking and hanging out with young people and trying to basically be a life coach, so to speak, and
Mm-hmm.
tell them like, what, just don't get stuck on what's happening right now. Because if you're meant to do something special in this world, it is going to be more difficult for you than the average person. Because if it's easy to create change, everyone will be able to create positive change. So the difficulties that we go through, they're not just for us to go through and suffer. They're supposed to be so that we can use that in whatever realm we end up in to make a change and create that legacy.
And like you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, all of the change makers were perceived as different.
Yes.
Yeah. And so using that difference to your advantage and seeing those children that may be different and help grow that, encourage
Right.
it, strengthen it. Mm.
And just acknowledge them. I think a lot
Yeah.
of a
Right
lot of
there.
students go unacknowledged.
Yeah.
And that's where they go to school and they're just like, well, I don't care. Or
Yeah.
they're out on the streets doing things to hurt themselves because they don't feel like anybody sees them.
Being seen really makes a difference and helps foster that hope. Being just seeing the humanity. And I think that's
Yes.
something that we're losing and we need to bring back, into education, into mental health, into healthcare, politics, everything.
Life.
Life, exactly. Well, Dr. Armstead, I would like to ask you this question I ask everybody since we are, excuse me, wrapping up. What gives you hope? What brings you hope?
Wow, that's a so there's a few things that give me hope. Number one, I am a believer. So God is my ultimate hope. I have been through some very dark days. And in fact, in 2020, I almost passed. And so coming through that and knowing that I survived that is what gives me the hope to focus on the fact that it is going to get better and it is going to be sunshine on the other side of the clouds. The other thing that gives me hope is my son. He has seen me in my worst. He's seen me in the midst of, custody battle, getting laid off from a job, all those things. And he still turns around and tells me, I'm learning from you and I'm learning from your mistakes too, so that I can go and do better. And that just gives me hope because it reminds me that even when we don't get it right, there's somebody that's going to use it to get it right. So those are the two biggest things. And of course, my parents, I'm the baby of the family, so I'm kind of spoiled, but my parents have a unique story themselves and the stuff that they went through just to be the successful individuals they are now is still, that brings me hope because I don't get stuck on in this moment. I have to keep recognizing that as long as I'm moving, it's better than me sitting still.
Hmm. As long as I'm moving, it's better than me sitting still. Hmm. Well, thank you so much for being on my podcast and everything you're doing to change education, to see the human in your students. You can find I'll put all your information in the show notes, but
Mhm.
why don't you share where can people find you?
Well, I am everywhere.
I saw that. That's why I was like, I'll just let you do it.
So because I was on the school board, I can't hide anymore. Um,
Oh.
I'm on Instagram at Dr. underscore Armstead. I'm on TikTok at Dr. Armstead dash AZ. I am on YouTube, Dr. Armstead dash AZ. And those are pretty much the major ways to find me. And for anybody listening, just know that you may support me on some of the things that I say sometimes, but then other times you'll be like, I don't know what she's talking about. She's crazy.
Isn't that just life, though? You know?
Yes.
But well, thank you so much for, like I said, coming on here. And I will post all that information in my show notes. And yeah, I hope that everyone has a hopeful and healing rest of their day. I got to figure out something there. Well, I know I say this all the time, but that was a great episode. And you can find more information about Dr. Armstead in my show notes. I listed her link tree below. She's on YouTube, as she mentioned, Instagram, Facebook, all over the internet. And she continues to advocate for appropriate education and individualized, diverse education. So, continue to check her out. Now, we have one more episode until my break. Also, please leave a review. And you can also support the show through Buy Me a Coffee. I hope you love, I hope you well, I hope your health, and I hope you're healing. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Hopeology. If you enjoyed today's show, please leave us a review. To learn more about us or listen to past episodes, you can find us on all your podcast streaming stations. If you are interested in being a guest, or if you have any feedback, please email us at hopeologypodcast@gmail.com. You can also support our show by clicking on the link in our show notes. Please also follow our Instagram page, Hopeology Podcast, and visit our website, www.hopeologypodcast.com.